This is Dr. Matthew Dunn, host of The Future of Email Marketing. My guest today is Kison Patel of Deal Room and M&A Science. Kison, apologies for being late, but welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was envying his mic setup. If you're listening to this and you notice that he sounds fantastic, I was envying his mic setup. You're a frequent guest on podcasts. Do you run one of your own as well?
I do. I have two podcasts that I host.
Terrific.
One about mergers and acquisitions, and
Yep.
another about leadership.
About leadership. Both are topics that I was hoping we could learn a bit from you about. Give people a highline about your company's plural.
Well, I'd say M&A science is where everything fits under.
Okay.
It's a compromise of several business lines that fall into either education or technology.
Mm-hmm.
Our business originally started with a product called Deal Room,
Mm-hmm.
where it's a project management product for managing mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
Started with this focus on the due diligence part of M&A. When you
Yeah.
go look to buy a company and you need to get in there and check all this information, make sure what's represented is accurate, identify the risks,
Yeah.
be able to start planning for what you're going to do after you buy the company. And that was all typically done in Excel, highly inefficient. People would use these virtual data rooms in conjunction with those Excel trackers.
Mm-hmm.
We brought it all together, made it a lot more efficient, that produced better results. Then as we evolved, we started managing more of the integration, the post-close activities,
Mm-hmm.
and then the pipeline. So it really become a full lifecycle management solution. And probably about 5 years ago, a friend of mine in marketing came to me one day and said, "Hey man, why don't you do a podcast?" And I was like, "What the hell's a podcast?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. It's gonna be the next big thing. You just got to do it."
Yeah.
So at the time too, I was really contemplating this bigger problem I noticed in the industry, where the industry itself was very siloed and lacked best practices.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we worked with a new client, they had such a unique way of looking at M&A and how to approach it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, why isn't there any standardization on any of this stuff? Where's the evidence on how we're supposed to do M&A?
Right.
And so I married the idea of using a podcast as a platform to interview practitioners and learn from their lessons, learn from their experience, and in turn identify some of the patterns, identify the trends, what are the proven techniques in the industry that actually work. And over time, we started documenting it. We started building our own frameworks around it. Published a couple books, tons of blogs, ebooks. We run summits every quarter where we have practitioners teach all these best practices.
Mm-hmm.
And today we operate an online school and an academy program, so others can learn and make that education more accessible. Now it's a virtuous cycle because we'll take a lot of these best practices, then build software products or solutions around it.
Yeah.
Hence the combination of education and technology that go hand in hand,
Yeah.
particularly in an industry that's as antiquated as ours.
In by industry, you're talking about M&A as an industry, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, yeah, and wow, the notion of trying to find or derive the science and the what works and the patterns. That's a heck of a lift. Like wow.
What
Uh,
makes it unique is that it's not like a lot of, when you think of finance technology, we always think of a lot of quantitative data, that we're analyzing a bunch of data and
mhm.
patterns and things and
Sure,
finding
sure.
ways to optimize with
Yeah,
technology tools.
yeah.
M&A is not like that at all. We're talking about the largest transactions in the world, but they're ultimately driven by people working together. And the problems you encounter on those transactions are people transactions. People not being able to work together, they're butting heads,
Right.
cultural differences,
Yeah,
things of that sort. And that's where it requires doing these qualitative interviews
yeah.
where you talk to practitioners and understand more about those kind of challenges and how do you overcome, because you do a large transaction, the result of doing that transaction leads to a large magnitude of change management, and in fact, it's the largest magnitude of change management that organization is going to go through. Once you acquire the business, you need to do several things to capture the value you intend, which oftentimes involves integrating that company into
Hmm.
your business,
Hmm.
which you're essentially peeling the business back layer by layer and reattaching it to your parent organization. And that's hard. It's again people, all people related challenges, and getting them aligned, focused on priorities, and working together.
Yeah, I mean the for lack of a better word, conventional wisdom about acquisitions is that they're as frequently unsuccessful in the long run as successful. And it sounds like you've made some real strides in helping reverse that conventional wisdom.
That's what's trending. We've seen
Nice.
a big shift from a finance focus in M&A to a
Yeah,
people
a
focus.
people
I think
focus, right?
more we continue that track, we
Hmm.
can change some of those metrics that we've had in the past.
Great coincidence. The gent I had on for a conversation yesterday, a friend of mine, Elliot Ross, he dialed in from London, and he is on the backside of being acquired. His company, Taxi for Email, um, not super big but wonderful in their niche, got acquired, and their acquirer got acquired like literally a month later. So he's living in this nested Russian doll of company structures and grappling with I'm not an entrepreneur running my relatively small SaaS. I'm now part of a good sized organization based in Amsterdam through the company in the U.S. that acquired us, and he had some great insights. It's some of it's good, some of it's bad, but it's the people issues and the culture issues, which are people issues, that he was focusing on as we talked about that. How do you get a handle on culture and people issues in a science way?
Some of the stuff is bringing about these conversations really early and trying to get alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking of what the end state you're looking to achieve from doing the acquisition and
Mm-hmm.
what that's going to look like, bringing that to the very front end of the deal process so that you can gather executives from both sides to align and identify what it's going to take to get there and achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
Outline that go to market, because ultimately each organization respectively is there to serve their customers as
Yeah.
best they can.
Sure. Sure.
Coming together, what is that going to look like? How are we going to do that? What's that going to look like for the customer? So that's the objective component. When we look at each organization's respected cultures,
Yeah.
it starts with values. And I think if each executive CEO can bring that to the discussion where we can talk about our organization values and talking about detail. Sometimes we use some pretty vague terms when we describe our values, but
Sure. Yeah.
if we can expand on them, that leads to a better understanding of culture and leadership approaches where we can identify with each other what's uniquely different, where we have some commonalities, where we may have some stark differences that could create some friction and
Mm-hmm.
may even warrant for us not to even pursue the deal because of that.
I was going to
Um,
ask you about that. Do you end up saying, based on the science, this is probably not going to work?
I say the more of the seasoned executives can realize that, especially if you bring in your HR folks
Mm-hmm.
early in the process.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that makes sense.
Which key? When we look at today's businesses, it's all about the people. We're not buying factories and things, hard assets anymore.
Right.
We're buying these hot technology companies that we want are looking to acquire some unique capability
Yep.
that we can bring about and extract value from. Well, there's some pretty sophisticated, intelligent folks behind that unique technology, and it's their way of working that ultimately you're acquiring, and you need to be able to preserve that. So the people is extremely important, and the
Mm-hmm.
more you can put considerations, have an understanding of their culture, the people, what drives them, what incentivizes them, how are you going to retain them?
Yeah.
Those things are really important to get understanding of earlier the better.
That's uh, that's incredibly refreshing to hear. I have to say because I, most of my decades of work have been around software in some way, shape, or form. Software, large, complex systems, and it's not a mature it's not a mature field, right? If you're acquiring a company with a software platform or service, it's not all perfectly bolted together, documented to the nth degree, best practices. The people who built it are going to be invaluable in making it actually be part of another organization. And if they go away, it's probably going to fall on its butt.
Big time.
Yeah,
We've seen
yeah,
it happen.
yeah.
Attrition.
Fascinating. And so we're back to or maybe more about the human dynamics is what you're saying now than the sort of mechanical and financial uh, vectors in that job of merging companies. Huh.
100%.
Um, yeah. And how how did you get here? Like, how did you end up in this field?
I started probably when I was like 10 years old. My dad would complain. He's like, this kid's always talking about big numbers. He keeps talking about everything in millions and billions. I used to draw out these fancy cars and put lasers and rocket boosters on them and put a
Yeah.
price tag.
Yeah.
Like, here's this $10 million car and whatnot. He thought something was wrong with me. And then I don't know. When I do one of these big interviews or we close a big deal with a large corporation, I always go back. I think last year we had a $2.6 billion deal done on our software platform and an
Wow.
$11 billion deal done with a Fortune 500 company. So I had to call dad up and say, hey, dad, we're in the billions. Uh,
That's
so
great.
there was that interest. I actually started by failing out of undergrad. That having that short attention span got to me. I struggled with these lecture-based classes, failed out of undergrad, found my way in a real estate career. I wasn't successful at it. I couldn't connect with the real estate sale as it was more of an emotional sale.
Hmm.
And I was always interested in business. And I was fortunate enough to find a gentleman, the only person in our company that was actually selling commercial real estate. And we're talking to him. I got enough inspiration to find a role in a little boutique M&A advisory practice with a couple guys that were just starting out.
Hmm.
And it was they gave me a shot. I got my feet grounded there. I loved looking at numbers. I like taking P&Ls and building a story on where the opportunity is in those businesses, helping folks understand the numbers better. And
Wow.
then ended up selling a few small businesses the first year. Didn't feel compelled to stay with the firm because I didn't believe they had a concrete strategy in place.
Hmm.
I went and started my own practice at an early age. I think I was about 22 years old. Started consulting, selling. I think I was just selling gas stations in the early beginning because I knew they had a real estate asset attached to it. It was moving me up from a few $100,000 businesses to the 1 to 3 million. Then I got into hospitality. I did that. Started private businesses. Went up to corporate, extended stay, Kimpton, extended stay America, La Quinta, and then I ended up working with small financial institutions, capital raise, buy side, sell side. We're talking like community banks. And then the recession happened, and that's where I was really interested in the tech space because I was getting burnt out. I feel like I hit this glass ceiling running a boutique firm. Every
Hmm.
time I got at bat with the large $100 million deal, I always lost it. And I thought this is not fun. You'd always lose it to a brand name firm. So I got involved with this tech startup that led me to see how the industry worked and got intrigued by the way those software engineers were using project management tools to manage building software. And
Hmm.
that's what led to the inspiration for starting Deal Room in 2012.
Wow. Okay. Wow. You really came into that. You came into it from the field itself, and now you're systematizing it, which is that's probably a better way to do it, right? Because you've really got an understanding how the dynamics of M&A, the people dynamics, the financial dynamics function. So automating it, streamlining it, systematizing it, sciencizing it is legitimately grounded in experience. You're not just looking from outside saying, "I think we can make a platform for this."
It's fun. It's what we can do. We can get better and better at it, and we
Yeah,
can apply it at scale.
nice, nice, fascinating. I've read a few books over the years on culture, business culture, company culture, and the challenges of that and the important role that plays. And it's been fascinating to watch culture become not just a not just a fuzzy wuzzy background word, but really a pivotal thing that people recognize about success and failure. Some companies are very good at acquisition and they've got the culture stuff dialed in. Others that do a lot of it seem to flop at it, and I think in part because they ignore that. Have you run into companies that are like that you really like working with, like when they're involved in an M&A deal, the long term success is likely?
It's almost like we're at a point where we choose our clients based on our compatibility with their culture.
Good for you.
When
Wow.
we feel aligned, we kind of there's things that we even look up to them. Like we're modeling, we're learning from them, we're inspired by them.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had one. We usually do like a pitch deck to a company, and
Sure.
we always have our little tagline on there. Well, we pitched to a company where like their tagline's better than ours, so we changed our tagline for that presentation. Told them that, saying, "Look, we're doing this because we changed it because yours is better, and we want to
Yeah.
use yours because we
Yeah.
identify with it." And
Wow.
so I like that when you can actually really work with an organization that you can identify with. And
Hmm.
I think early days, you got to do what you got to do. You're going to work and try to get any account you can. And that's part of the journey. But once you get to that point, you really find where you created your capabilities of building value. Then you can be more selective about those companies you work with,
Yeah.
and even thinking about that. Then when you line around that, then there's common beliefs, especially for us. Like we're big about agile and organizations that strive. Maybe they may be traditional, but they're actively striving to move to more of an agile based approach.
Hmm.
That works really well. We're able to help them there, and they may have some components of it. No, we understand that maybe they're at a certain point where they're getting a level of success for deals, but at least we know we're part of that journey to help them improve.
Hmm.
And I think there's definitely a big learning curve in doing M&A. Like your first couple deals, you're probably going to screw some major things up. Uh, but so the maturity I think is a big factor.
Yeah.
I think coupling that with have they really evolved when we look at being change oriented? Do they have that culture of continuous improvement? Are they at being adaptive? Are they trying new things? There's organizations that may have been very mature, they've been around, really big brand names you've heard of, but they're doing the same thing they did 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's for us is like a tough one, especially when we know that change is going to be extremely difficult when they don't have that buy-in across their organization to make those changes. Um,
Yeah. And it's becoming, I think it's harder and harder to do the same thing for 20 years, right? The pace of change being what it is.
and they're going to change. And it gets really hard to be optimistic about the results.
That's yeah, that's got to be a pit of the stomach sensation when you can observe that and say, man, I don't know if that's going to work. I hate to see that. I'm curious about something, a bit of a meta question, but marketing of your own company, is it mostly word of mouth inside the world of M&A at this point, based on your success?
I always thought word of mouth. I thought we had some virality
Hmm.
built into our product because if we host an M&A deal, there's going to be to a couple hundred people involved,
Sure.
right? I'm selling my company and I got bankers in there, consultants in there, lawyers in there, the other party in there.
Yeah.
And I always thought, oh, well, if they get the exposure to the product, they're going to want to use it for one of the other deals.
Yeah.
That did not happen. That did not happen the way
Wow.
I thought.
Wow.
That word of mouth, that did not happen the way I thought. We see it now. We're talking 10 years in the business. 5 first years were very stagnant. It took a lot. Our industry is very conservative.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to really build trust and the traction and
Hmm.
really build security properly. There's a
Hmm.
lot of things that go into that. So the first
Sure.
5 years is a big R&D period. The
Yeah.
last 5 years when we started building traction, but we start seeing in the last couple of years where now we're starting to see that. So it really took a long. You have to have a level of some market penetration before that starts coming in play.
Okay. Interesting.
Most of our business, we do generate a lot of inbound business, but it's coming because this podcast that we started 5 years ago has truly evolved into a media business of its own. I mean, we have over 350 published blogs, ebooks.
Wow. Yeah.
A lot of it's just the art of, well, I guess I should say art, but science of the way you repurpose your content from a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
transcribe it.
Yep.
We've been able to do a lot of creative things with it, pull out highlights, things of that sort. But we published the book, and I always look at the book like maybe there's 100 people in the world that read this book, but there's probably about 100,000 people that know about it because for the longest time we would just take snippets of it, post it on LinkedIn, and get a whole discussion thread going off
Hmm.
of that.
Hmm.
And we
Yeah.
kept doing that over and over for a full year. And if you added up all those views, I mean,
Yeah.
we've accumulated so many different engagements, views, comments, likes, and so forth. So it's, the way you have a content strategy built out to your overall marketing. I think that's what really drove a lot of the awareness and interest into our various products.
Yeah. Everyone's a publisher, right? I mean, in a fundamental sense now, everyone's a publisher, and I would bet there've also been like speaking and public exposure opportunities on the back of the book from people who haven't necessarily read it.
Publishing a book is good. It gives you a lot of credibilities.
Yeah.
We published it early 2020. So we
Okay.
published this book, and then COVID lockdown happened shortly after. But coming out of it, I remember second half of the year, I got invitations to go speak at a lot of large companies,
Mm-hmm.
the IBMs, the 3Ms, Cisco's, and
Wow.
so it's nice. It does give you credibility a lot, like it's you speaking engagements. There's not a lot of conferences going on, but it does make it a lot easier to apply and get submitted for speaking at various events. But then,
The,
and we have organizations reach out and saying, "Hey, we need help with this problem, and you wrote a book about this problem. Can you
right.
come talk to
Right.
us?"
Right. Yeah. I think I've got a book about writing a book. Dan Kennedy, and a co-author, I believe, have a like, look. You really need to do this, and the speaking side of it kind of amuses me because I've seen any number of people who will take what they wrote in an entire book and basically try and do it in a half an hour to an hour for the people who wouldn't sit down and read the book. Like, let me give you the highlights since you probably didn't sit down and flip the pages and read the thing and then lather, rinse, repeat, do that over and over. Well, that's fascinating to hear a content strategy play out so coherently, and particularly to hear that podcasting has played an integral role in that. Not everybody jumped on that bandwagon as early as you did, I think.
We're fortunate in our industry. I think there was only about 5 podcasts about M&A when we
Wow.
started. Now
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
over 50, and we're ranked right at the top.
Are you? Nice. Nice.
I
Well, I mean, that's not just because you started early. It's obviously a quality thing, as well, because I suspect you wouldn't be at the top if you weren't doing a great job at it. But um, I talked with a gent the other day who runs a podcast for the like new home building industry, and he had much the same impact for his business. He's like, people know me because we've been doing this for a long time, and they're starting to come to us, and they know who I am when I reach out to them, and so on. So, is it getting saturated, the podcast space?
It's tough starting a podcast now. I started a personal podcast earlier, well, sort of about middle of last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a passion project for me. I have 3 young children, and I'm interested in exposing them to leadership lessons early.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, if I'm doing it for my kids, why not just record the content and share it with others? But then also with my daughter, I always preach my principles. I thought, Dad doesn't know all this stuff. Why don't we make a point to go interview other people and you can learn from them? But now it's been fun. It's been a little series I do. She's got a little jewelry business. We're starting to get speakers about from the industry, and I'm teaching her how to network and do all these other little fun things that
Wow.
yeah.
Future entrepreneur, in the making there, it sounds like.
Yeah, she's doing good. I started with the little lemonade stand. I think when she was 6 years old,
There you go.
and
There you
at first
go.
I wasn't into it, man. I just said, I don't know, I know. And then I thought about it. I was like, this is actually an opportunity to teach her a lot of the principles. And
Yeah.
I said, all right, honey, I don't know if you've chose the right dad to do this lemonade stand with, but we're not taking any shortcuts.
Right.
We're going to Costco. We're getting real lemons.
Right.
You started hand squeezing them. Then, like after a while, I realized like we were located relatively close to Wrigley Field in Chicago. So she sells lemonade on a game day. I mean, she's making a couple $100.
That's awesome.
I mean,
And
next thing you know, I got a commercial juicer there.
yeah,
She
yeah.
got her brothers as like little contract employees running back and forth to get lemonade.
That's wonderful. And I mean, a lemonade stand, it's a cliche, but that's a full business. You got supply chain issues, finance, like it's a complete little micro business.
You know what trips me out is how many people knew about that lemonade stand. I would go meet people through business networking, and I would mention it like, wait a minute, I bought lemonade from there.
That's
Or even
great.
I met the police officer one time, and he was like, I bought lemonade from there.
That's wonderful. That is really
That's so
great.
funny.
She'll be
Well,
telling that story the rest of her life too.
yeah, hopefully she remembers. But she had a little, kind of like a bar cart. We turned into the lemonade stand, put a big, giant, rainbow colored umbrella,
Hmm.
and that was it. It was
That's
just
it.
a fun little
Visibility
business.
and the it's the cliche. I forget the book. I think of the $100 million deal that I read recently. It's like, look, sell to a thirsty crowd. That's principle number one. Whatever you're selling, if you've got a thirsty crowd, it's a lot easier. And she's got
I
a thirsty crowd, especially on game day.
She came to me after COVID happened, and she's like, Dad, what am I gonna do? Like, I can't do the lemonade stand. They cancel the games and whatnot. And I said, honey, you got to do just like the rest of the world. You got to refocus on your digital distribution model.
Yeah, yeah,
And
adapt.
so today she has her own brand, Fueglo, that she sells handmade jewelry online.
Wow,
So
that's
she
really
she
something.
she she took on it. I don't get much of her time now when I ask her for help because she used to record commercials for my podcast. I don't
Yeah,
she doesn't have time for me.
she's busy running. I was going to say, but my mental note is here. I think I'm going to have to get in touch with Kison and say, can I get your daughter on as a guest? This sounds fascinating, and you know, probably more adept at social media than folks of our generation.
Yeah, she's working on it. She's got TikTok. She's definitely getting the views and likes, but now we're talking about conversion. But she's very much she's at 11, so she's got the starting to hit the teenage where,
Yeah. Ooh.
hey, Dad, you don't need to tell me what to do. I got this. So I don't know. She'll figure it out.
I'll be. You'll have to drop me a note. Like, tell her you were on a podcast about email marketing and see if she rolls her eyes because the younger they are, the more they go, oh, email, and then there's a certain threshold where they start realizing, oh, you can keep control of that. That's a direct relationship. That's actually invaluable. Um,
I think she's getting a little bit of it because her store is on Shopify, and
yeah,
Shopify will
smart.
have your sort of recovery campaigns that they
Yeah.
built out pretty much out of the box.
Yep.
So I think that's probably the next thing. Email marketing is an interesting one to chat about too, because I feel like we had an interesting experience with it where I got, what my early consulting practice is what made it was we were so early. I mean, I started back in 2003.
Okay.
So, I mean, back then you were doing fax. I don't know if you remember the fax email. You'd get a program to like mass fax
Mass
people.
facts. Yeah.
That's what we were doing. So I ran a newsletter through fax, and then I remember migrating it to email. And back then,
You were
everybody
cutting
checked their
edge. Yeah.
everybody checked their email. Everybody's like a 70+% open rate. I don't think the first email tools you could actually track. They didn't even have tracking on it, but you knew
No.
you just
Yeah.
had a high open rate on those things.
Yeah.
Um, that was a consult starting this tech company. I knew email was going to be important. I wanted to do a newsletter and started doing that. But it wasn't like the kosher thing. Like today, it blows my mind how many times I have to hit unsubscribe every time I check my inbox.
Yeah.
At least 6 to 10 times a day, I'm
Yeah.
hitting unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe.
Yeah. I
And
was. Yeah. Do you scan by who it's from and then delete without reading as well?
yeah, oh, absolutely. It just
Okay.
whatever it is, I don't know. Unsubscribe, delete. If I can't, I hate the worst is when it's like reply to me to opt out. It's like you're getting the block and then spam. Done. Um, so now I kind of learned like you really got to be organic about it because even that first list, we were sort of just throwing people in there and
Mm-hmm.
doing that. About 10 years ago, we got away with it. I think back then
Yeah.
we got our brand out there, but we really didn't have a clear distinction on what we actually did.
Yeah.
So it ended up being a big overhead. We're doing all these interviews adjacent with it and stuff, and I ended up stopped doing it. But now we rebuilt it and did it in a very organic way. Now it becomes like a really once you do organic, it's just so much valuable. Like it's so now realizing it from actually doing it. I think we peaked out at 38,000 subscribers, but now I run a newsletter with 3,000, and it's way more
Way
powerful.
more powerful because they're really interested in what you have to say.
Oh yeah, you could send like a call to action for something specific, and it, boom, you get a significant like higher than what we had from you and 38,000 people that are actually responding to it.
That's
Uh,
quick.
in fact, when people sign up, we get information, quite a bit of information to really understand what they're looking to get out of that newsletter,
Yeah.
and that helps too. I think the thing we learned is, don't look at it as just lead gen. Like I got this person, they send their information, I'm going to go call them right away. If you have a direct call to action and it's a direct request for a call, great, fine. But somebody's signing a newsletter, don't do that.
Yeah.
But I think when you wait a couple months and they've really understood your content, then they that's probably when the time is you can actually reach out, especially if you capture that information of, what are you trying to get out of this, and then you can follow up. It's like, hey, you mentioned that you're looking to get this out of the newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Are we doing that? How can we get better? Let's get feedback. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about some of your challenges,
Right.
and
Right.
how can we help you with some of those things? It's interesting. I'm wondering where email is going to go, because I like the resurgence when we've seen some of these millennial publications or geared towards millennials, like The Hustle and Morning Brew, where
Mm-hmm.
they just did the right thing. They kind of taken it, and we've seen traditional print media try to go digital and really struggle with it. But they're like, you just got to have a good voice, and you got to have concise information that people can get up to speed about what's going on in the world in
Yeah.
a short amount of time.
Yep.
And that's done really well. But yeah, I'm kind of curious on your perception. Where do you see it going? Because it is the direct channel, but it's getting very noisy.
It's very noisy. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's an opportunity for an entrepreneur. Somebody could solve that. Somebody can clear my inbox from all the garbage.
Yeah.
I would pay a couple $100 at this point. I would pay maybe even up to $500 a month for that, because I have somebody manually doing it. I literally,
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's like I suspect that's one of the probably job number one for the virtual assistant industry is help me sort out my inbox. You've got some monopoly players that are parked on the inbox piece of it. Google being the really obvious one, Apple being a secondary one, Yahoo as well. They're trying to solve it with automation, but it's pretty messy. I've got a couple of accounts that flow through Gmail. I watch what goes in the promotions tab versus the inbox versus elsewhere. I'm like, yeah, no, like nice try, but what matters to me isn't necessarily obvious to your AI. So I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough discretion and smarts to automate that task yet. Um,
what about with email campaigns? Have you ever seen a tool that ties an email campaign with the placement ads? And I don't want to get into like the HubSpot or those kind of automation tools, because I feel like they're still really manual to do there. Like you still got to like create your email thing, and that's a separate thing. And then you go
yeah,
in there and you got a
yeah,
workflow for putting ads up, and it's
yeah,
separate.
yeah,
But somebody had a workflow that really tied it all together, because I feel like that's such a powerful thing, is if you can have some kind of email campaign with a call to action, but then you had your retargeting
yeah,
in conjunction with it. But it tends to be a bit of siloed effort. Sometimes in our company, it's different people doing those things,
yeah.
and then that real fluid continuity doesn't exist.
And one of the fundamental issues behind that, I think, is that email itself as an end-to-end digital channel has a very broken feedback mechanism. The way you know whether or not an email campaign is getting engagement, are people opening this, isn't actually an email mechanism, it's a web mechanism. It's a pixel being opened via HTTP, and now thanks to Apple, that's not accurate as it used to be,
Yep.
absent solution we're bringing to market. So doing that signal noise feedback thing to refine what you send is very hard. I got an email the other day. I mentioned this to someone. I got an email from Litmus. That's a big tech company in the email space specifically. The message from them had a big button that said, "Do you want to keep hearing from us?" Essentially, and I clicked yes. But it was a bold move on their part. A lot of email marketers would never give you the opportunity to exit. They're so desperate to hang on to those leads. Your 38,000 versus your 3,000. You effectively culled it down to the ones that really were engaged, however you went about that. 3,000 is not a huge number, right? There's a lot of work you invested in getting down to those 3,000. And a lot of that was not through the mechanisms of email itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Yeah, it's a daunting lift. Oh man, Kisan, I'm bummed. Actually somehow I got scheduled with another conversation in 3 minutes, so I have to wrap up ours. But it's
Sure.
been a pleasure learning about the M&A world from you. Wow, I'm really impressed.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Happy to have the conversation.
If
And
someone's listening, what's the best way for them to hunt down you or the company and connect?
interested in learning anything about M&A, they can visit mascience.com. We have tons of blogs, ebooks, podcasts, all related to M&A.
Yep.
Just big advocates of getting exposure to the industry. There's tons of careers in M&A
Yeah.
that are definitely more accessible than people think they are. You don't have to go to Ivy League school and get an MBA.
There you
Uh,
go. What's the
I'm on
title of
link
your book, by the way?
Agile M&A.
Okay, got it, got it. I'm gonna have to put that in my reading list, and then maybe pick your brain afterwards. Thanks so much for making the time today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, my guest has been Kison Patel of M&A Science and Deal Room. Thank you, sir. Burp, burp, burp.